Joe here from the Working Fans Podcast. And at the Working Fans Podcast, this is just a podcast that three lifelong fans created to have a place to talk comedy and pro wrestling. Now, our comedy podcast releases every Tuesday, while our wrestling podcast releases every Thursday. We release bonus episodes under the moniker Working Fans Presents every now and then. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, any major podcast provider. The important thing is just please like, rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to us. Now, we have started a new thing. We are now on Amazon and Audible. So those episodes release every Monday. And that's kind of going through the archives and just releasing our old episodes in a new area. So if you want to live through the process with us again, take that journey with us again, you can find us over on Amazon and Audible. Now, if you can't get enough of us in the audio form, check out our YouTube. It's youtube.com/C/Working Fans Wrestling Pod, or just search Working Fans Podcast on YouTube. We have the whole archive is up there. And if you listen to the Working Fans Podcast, you are more than familiar with the 531. That is our signature segment where we take your top 5 lists on a particular subject, vote it down to a top 3, and then debate it down to a top 1. Now, guys, if you want to hear 3 guys talk shit about comedy, wrestling, life, anything, you will enjoy the Working Fans Podcast. Welcome to the Working Fans Podcast. We are excited today. We got the mighty Scott Chaplain. You can find him, Scott Chaplain, on Facebook, at Scott_Chaplain on Instagram and Twitter, and go to patreon.com/WrestleRoast to get the best wrestling Patreon in the game. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Very, very good. How are you two?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for
we're doing
so.
Excellent.
Same.
Now,
where are you guys living? Like, where are you located?
We're in Connecticut.
Oh, okay. Hell yeah.
Where are you from?
I've driven through there to get to places that I rather be.
Yeah, that is definitely Connecticut.
Yeah,
did you drive
highway
through Connecticut to get to the AEW show in Boston? I gotta ask.
Oh, I didn't go to Boston.
Oh wow, Dave was actually there this week, and
Really?
It did, yeah.
Oh, that is fantastic, man. You loved it?
Yeah, it was a good time. Actually, so the match that's going to air tonight when we're recording this on Rampage, Kingston and Danielson, absolutely one of those like beat your ass All Japan style matches. And it was so good that Seidel and Dante followed it up and the crowd was bored.
Well, I heard they didn't do as much high flying or something.
It did, but it was, I think, partly too, they were coming off that Danielson Kingston high. That those guys were in a bad position. So.
How was the? I read again. We didn't see it yet, me or Joe, because it hasn't aired yet for us while we're recording. But how was the Punk Kingston thing?
I like that. Now, from where we were sitting, it's one of those things where live you don't get the backstage segments as good, but from what I saw, it was really well done, and I'm really curious to see where they're going with Kingston as a character, because I've been thinking they've kind of been hitting at Mox as a heel a little bit.
Oh, Mox is a heel for sure, yeah.
Yeah, like when he dropped Yuta a couple weeks ago, and then he beats up 10, I'm like, eh. And so I thought, maybe Kingston's going to still be babyface, but now I'm thinking, I mean, I guess I can say it because people are going to like see the match before this airs, but there's a little thing at the end of Kingston and Danielson where Kingston refuses to shake Danielson's hand, and then he gets into that argument with Punk. So I'm like, this feels like a definite heel turn for him too. Then
Did you hear what the argument? My issue is, what is the argument? Because how is Eddie Kingston a heel against a guy who just came back? Like, the whole idea is
Right.
Eddie's been struggling and dying. So how do you boo him? And also, he gets cheered more than almost anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the crowd, like at least where we were sitting, I don't know how it will come off on TV tonight, but there were more people or equal cheering for Kingston over Danielson. And
Wow.
Danielson is one of the most popular guys.
Isn't it crazy that if it was WWE, you know how it would sound because they would literally edit your audio?
Oh, yeah.
Bonkers.
1,000%. And actually, even in Punk Fish, you could hear Bobby Fish chants there.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Yeah. So
That's one of the best things about AEW is you're getting presented the stars that you like in a way that you like them. That I mean, there's been a few misses here and there, but for the most part, the returns have been amazing, and just the storylines they've built out of it have been great.
Well, and even the bad stuff, it's almost more forgivable because there's this feeling of the wrestler had a lot to do with it, and so you're also seeing it through their lens and maybe what their intention, as opposed to like some phantom writer or going like, oh, Vince thought of this 30 minutes before the show. You're actually seeing how each wrestler's brain works within their storylines. So it's like if you like, you know, if you're genuinely into music, you want to look into it more and figure out why they did the thing. And with this, you can find out just because you're a fan of the wrestler, because that is the wrestler. That's what they're presenting. I mean, at least that's what it seems like.
Yeah.
Unless
like
Tony Khan is completely changing people's ideas, which it doesn't seem that way.
No, I was going to say too, like with WWE, it's like, yeah, you have a ton of talented people there, but they're all kind of trained for the most part to do one thing, one style. Whereas AEW, you have all these talented people, but everybody's doing kind of their own thing, like you said. And it's okay. Like you can tell, like a great example would be like Jim Ross was probably not a big fan of the Elite. You know, Dark, like when you just hear like protons, you can see like the anger in his voice. But you know, it's fine. Nobody cares. They're doing that, and there's still a match later in the show, like I said, with Danielson, because there's something for everybody with this.
Yeah. I went to Double or Nothing, the first one in Vegas, and so that was their first pay-per-view. And even on that first show, there was this feeling of, oh, this is a world's worth of wrestlers coming together and showing off their individual styles. Like, we got everything we wanted in that show, and it was the first time in so long I saw that happen.
Yeah, even Dark is getting interesting because with Dark Elevation, at least, you're getting like a lot of the Japanese female wrestlers on that show, and it's like you're getting all these different. They're teaming up with different independent female, and they're having these different tag matches and stuff like that. And I love the fact that it's just not structured, I guess.
Yeah. I agree. And I don't, you know, people go, oh, they mention people like Mike Lawrence, a guy who's on the podcast with me. I know he was a guest on your show. A big issue with him is he doesn't want to watch those things. And so when they go, this guy's 9-0, and it's like, well, I've never seen him wrestle once. It's, well, they told you it. You don't need to see him wrestle. They told that's like anything. You've never seen, you know, certain football players, all of their games, but they fill you in. They fill you in on what's going on. I think that's completely fine.
And that's one thing I've liked about AEW, how they have the Dark and the Elevation, where you can see these up and coming stars. You can see these matches that wouldn't necessarily be on TV. And it's almost like as if you're watching like Lord of the Rings or something, and you know there's a backstory. AEW is giving you that backstory to watch and see how these guys progress. And I've personally liked that the best.
And Scott, to piggyback off what you said a little bit too about like you don't have to watch it and they're telling you about it. I was just telling somebody the other day, they're asking me like they like some of the Marvel movies, but they hadn't watched all of them. And they're like, do I have to watch all of them? I'm like, you don't have to, but if you do, you're going to get rewarded for paying attention. I was like, so there's that. And that's what I think, you know, with AEW Dark and Elevation and all that too.
Yeah, I agree. Good
so,
shit.
Scott, I'm going to ask you, we're kind of just getting into wrestling talk. So, what like your fandom? Like who hooked you in pro wrestling?
Man, Stone Cold Steve Austin. First man I saw, it felt like he could handle his liquor, you know? I was like a little boy. My father was an alcoholic, and to see this rebellious person that reminded me a lot of my father, but none of the negatives was really exciting to me. But it was partially that. Also, I was immediately into the dirt sheets. Like I remember being 9 years old, and I would print out SmackDown results every Wednesday morning and bring them to school and just like read them to myself. And it was in grade school. I just liked the whole behind the scenes of it. I liked how it was put together and guys' ideas, and you just fall into a world. It becomes more than just what you're watching on television. And I was into that.
Now, did you meet anybody that you knew that could equal that kind of fandom, like friend-wise? Because you've got some friends, and Dave's talked about it before, that they know of wrestling, but then people that are like, oh, man, I read the dirt sheet, and this guy is coming from this territory. Like, did you meet anyone else that was as dedicated a fan as you at that time?
In my hometown, no. Honestly, no. I remember there was kids I wouldn't usually hang out with at all, but since they liked wrestling, I gave them a shot. And then it would never work out.
Right there.
It never worked out. There was like 5 kids that I tried to be friends with over wrestling, but it just was not computing, And then there's also those guys who really like wrestling, and you start talking. I got a friend, dude, Monroe Martin. He's a comic. He loves pro wrestling, but when you talk to him about it, he loves it in the way a child loves it, and so you can't even talk about it like the way a fucking Mark would talk about it. He just loves any of it. Like, no matter what shit they throw down your throat, he just thinks it's so amazing that they do it, even if it's a repeat every week,
Wow, so he'll watch Raw and be like, did you see Raw last night? Did you see what they did? And you're like, yeah, I slept through half of it, and I kind of woke up during a match I thought I might like.
Yeah, he gets a kick out of it. He sees it like, the way people see the circuit.
God bless him, though. Man, fuck, I can't do that.
No, for sure.
And I found even like, I watched a lot of wrestling, but then when you start a podcast about wrestling, it's almost like, God, I feel like I'm so much deeper in, or I've got to know so much more.
Now, for the most part, like I avoid WWE almost completely. I just read results, and with Twitter now, you see the highlights anyway of things, and you can get an idea of what's what, It's like when you're a fan long enough, you become. It's like, I assume doctors don't have to read entire sheets of things to get the gist of something, Like, you go, I know exactly what that was like. I do watch AEW, but I don't always watch it live. I'll wake up early and watch it, and I try not to. Like, the pandemic really got me into evolving my life around when wrestling was on, because what else are you gonna do? And we were doing the podcast, so why not focus on it? And that got hellish. Quick. So yeah.
Now, speaking of hellish, have you ever tried keeping up with the G1? Because I've wanted to do it every year. And then man. 2 days in, I'm like, fuck this. You guys are throwing too much at me at once. And then you're gonna end on Shibata Saber. Like, I don't have time enough in the day for this.
Yeah. Well, man, I mean, so the way I am able to watch it is I wake up at 5 a.m. for work anyway. And so usually the shows start at 4:30 or 5. And so you can miss the first few matches anyway, because it's, Young Lion shit or, 8-man tags or whatever. So I watched almost all of the G1, But it's, dude, I'm literally driving to work, looking down here and there, you know.
Exactly what you mean.
Like, thank God for English commentary, because a lot of times it's like I'm doing something early in the morning, and if they don't release one of the shows with English commentary, there's more likely a chance I'm going to die in a car crash because I'm looking down to see the action more. You know?
Dude, these guys give me shit all the time because I drive a truck for a living. I drive a box truck, and
There we go.
Red.
Yeah.
I got wrestling on all time in the morning. That's how I keep up with everything. It's just like
because he can't stay up for it, so it's like he'll be watching Dynamite the next morning.
Yeah, that's what I did Thursday morning. I watched Dynamite on the way to work, and the first few moments of work, I
find I just watch stuff that revolves around my schedule sometimes. Like I started watching SmackDown now recently, not because I'm glued to the show. It's just on when I'm up. I'm working and I have it on in the background, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like that sucks.
Dude, New Japan, cool. Something so nice about being up. Nobody else is awake. But you are, and these people are in Japan, you know, there's something really cool about it. And it's like, it's the only present thing outside of yourself that happens that early in the morning. Like, who else are you going to communicate with? You know, nothing else is live. It's just, everything's bullshit. You know, even the radio at 5 a.m, it's like religious stations or something, you know?
Yeah. Now, I was working a different job when Wrestle Kingdom was on this year, and I was working overnight. So I did an overnight inventory, and as I'm counting, I just had my iPad set up right there with all the matches, and I'm like, where else can you see this? Like,
yeah, feels like a treat. I imagine it's what soccer fans feel like, and part of the reason it becomes a rabid thing, because you start adjusting your schedule. There's like an intimacy. Most people wouldn't do that, you know, and then so you know you get amped up.
I'm super
New
jealous.
Japan is just delivering such good content that it's like it's worth getting up at that time to be rewarded with just killer matches,
Dude,
even on your base level shows.
And then also, if you're really into it, it becomes, or I don't see it, and then I have to avoid Twitter and Instagram all day because every account I follow is gonna mention whatever happened.
Yeah,
that kills me. That messes me up a lot. Where I forget that I missed a show in the morning, and then I go on Instagram, and it's like, what? The tag titles switched hands? Why? What? Yeah.
I definitely had to do that a few Dynamites and stuff before too, where I'm like, same. I'm going to bed at 9. I'll be up at 2:30 in the morning. Let's just put it on. I'm super jealous of West Coast people too. Like I also watch like a lot of MMA, and like I'd be up to like 1 a.m. sometimes. Some of these fight cards would end, and like we went to Vegas one time, and like holy shit, it's 10 o'clock. This thing's finishing. It's like
daytime. I know.
Yeah,
so strange.
It's fucking nuts. But
yeah, but also their cities shut down earlier. Like those places also, it's just life, you know, ends earlier.
Now, you were saying you were an Austin fan and he drew you in too. What time period? Like, because I'm thinking like Austin Brett, maybe 97, maybe a little before. Okay.
So it was probably, well, I was a huge fan by the time WrestleMania 17 came around, and that was what, 2001 or 2000? That was 2001.
It's 2001, yep.
So probably 15, WrestleMania 15, I got into it. And then when Austin got hit by the car, I was like mega fan. And I you know, I needed to know who the fuck hit Austin. And but then quickly after that, you know, since I was so into the dirt sheets and stuff, it became who's actually the best wrestlers. And then I just, you know, I watched a lot of TNA as an 8th grader or freshman in high school. I was like a massive AJ fan, you know, going back and realizing how great Michaels was in the 90s, as well as, you know, being a huge fan of his run. Like after Austin, I was like a Jericho Benoit fan, you know, like anybody who was delivering great matches, I was a fan.
Interesting. Yeah. Cause I started off, so I'm older than you, but like I had that Hogan era, but like I got bored like in my teens, and suddenly they started pushing Bret Hart as a singles wrestler with Mr. Perfect and Shawn Michaels. And it's like, oh, this is what I want to watch now. This is what I'm into. And so,
Yeah, like
okay, so you
sport.
kind of made a similar transition from those, yeah.
Oh yeah, it quickly became like the wildness of Stone Cold, the rebellion. I mean, dude, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Eminem were the thing as a child, and they're both very similar in that at the end of the day, it's just fuck you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kids love that, and sure, it probably ruined most of my life and stuff, and made me crueler than I needed to be. But I loved Austin so much. And then, just such a transition to like, oh, wow, wait, Angle is having the best matches. And, Austin hurt his neck. Austin hurt his knee. Like, you couldn't go to Austin for the barn burners anymore.
Right.
But you still wanted to see what he was doing. So there were these other guys that were kind of, dude, a lot of matches were pretty terrible in terms of like main event guys.
Oh, yeah.
Always in WWE, like the history of WWE is mostly the main event guys not being that great, which is kind of strange.
It was the crowds were so rabid at that time.
Oh, dude, that crowd! It was like
the signs. Oh my god!
Isn't it wild that when the WWE gets away from steroids and the bigger guys, they almost turned into a work rate company for a very little bit because they had to. Something that they're never known for outside of the Steamboat Savage match, I would say.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Now, as you're a big fan of AEW on your podcast, if you had to bring up, we don't talk negatives here very often, but if you had to, if there were some things you could see AEW improve on, where would you like to see them make improvements? Because they don't need many.
Yeah, they don't need many. I think their timing in terms of come the end of the show, it feels very rushed. I think lately they've been sticking the landing a little better, but I mean, still just a few weeks ago, you had Suzuki and Moxley go like 6 minutes and there was a commercial break during it. I think that's a big issue. And honestly, just camera guys not catching everything.
Right.
That's a big, that's why I love New Japan. They follow the action and it comes off real and there's these shots that look like it's film or something, and then WWE, it's just very generically filmed. And then AEW, I just feel like there's moments where they completely miss. Like even this week, Pac did the backflip and sat down like Aleister Black does, and they didn't even catch Malachi Black. They didn't even catch it. It's just things like that are super important. That really bothers me. But in terms of character, a lot of guys hate the factions, but I think you need that in the first few years because you're trying to get as many people over as possible. You're trying to see who gets over. You're trying to get everybody out there. And if you throw everybody in a faction and put them out there, then you're going to see who they like, who people like and who people don't like. And the same in terms of, the Bucks and Omega, where, it's like, oh, they're EPs or whatever. So should they have the titles? And it's like, dude, it's the second year. Yes, they should. They're the whole reason this place exists. Like, do we not remember what got us here? It's these guys. Are we not going to give them a moment at all? It wouldn't make any sense.
I like what you said about factions too. I never put it together. You're right. It is a great way to get a bunch of people over because
you got to think about it in the long run.
Yeah, because look what WWE did. Like they had that Cruiserweight Classic that everybody was raving about. But then they brought everybody up at the same fucking time, and nobody was getting over, and it was the same stuff. And even recently, they rebranded NXT, which was awful because NXT didn't really need rebranding, but they did. But it's that was the problem. You get one guy that maybe gets over, and you're throwing 50 different people at it. It's who are these people? Why am I following all these people? You know what I mean? Unless you're a diehard of diehard, it's very hard to stay.
For sure. And they're more they should be more, I'd call them camps. I mean, they don't. And so what do you do? They're factions. But even the way New Japan, everybody's in a faction, but you almost forget. It's there's Los Ingobernables and Bullet Club, and then everybody else is on their own. But no, they're in factions. It's just not harped on, and you don't really think about it too much. So if you think about it in terms of, they're kind of a camp, when you do work at a place, you do train with people, you do go on the road with people. You do have travel buddies, and these are these people. But it's not explained like that, and so yeah, I can't make excuses, but that's how I would like to interpret it.
Right.
Yeah. Now to switch gears a little bit, Scott, you were involved with the Wrestle Roast podcast.
Yeah.
We've asked Mike how it came about, but can you tell us a little bit for those unfamiliar and give us your side of how the podcast kind of came together and where it is now?
So Dan St. Germain had a podcast, Total F and Marks, and he had it for like a while. And then I was a guest on it a few times. And then it became weekly. And then it was just, hey, do you want to do this with me? So I did. And we were on ad-free shows. No, not ad-free shows at first. We were on All Things Comedy or whatever. And then
Great podcast network.
yeah, and then Conrad talked to us and was like, hey, what if you did a roast thing, and then I'll put you on our network or whatever. And we were like, all right, whatever, we'll call it Wrestle Roast. We got Robert Karpelis involved. He's WWE creative-ish on Twitter, which is like a super funny account, especially if you're watching Raw or something. It's like just genuinely funny comments on the show throughout the night. And so we got him on board, and he also is a former writer for the WWE. So he has like really great insight, and he just thinks like more technical than us in a business way that is super important because it is a business. So then we got together with him. So we're just being stupid about wrestling. He adds like an element of actual legitimacy to it. And then Lawrence got involved too, the way I got involved with Dan, where he came on as a guest a bunch. Then he was just whatever, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, now we just every week we roast wrestlers and talk about the week in wrestling, mostly AEW, which isn't on us. It's really on WWE. They, unless we're shitting on like a terrible decision they made, it rarely comes up. And yeah, I don't know. That's how it happened.
Yeah, if anybody hasn't checked out Wrestle Roast, these guys are hilarious. Just this week, Scott, your opening joke, I was editing while I was listening, and I laughed out loud. I was like, geez.
Oh, thanks, man.
When did you realize you had a knack for roast jokes?
Okay, so this. Oh no! Oh wow! It involves Dan St. Germain and Mike Lawrence. So Dan was releasing a album with Comedy Central, and he had a roast like with the daises and stuff. This was before roast battles. At the Stand, which is a club in New York City, and like Comedy Central, all these people were there and stuff. And then he had me on the dais, and I was like, I was the only person unknown on it, like didn't have a credit. And it just so happened I ended up writing a good set, and it worked really well. And then I was like, oh, I'm capable of that. And then like a month after we did that, the Stand started doing roast battles. And since they saw me do that, they just asked me to do the roast battles, and I would do them all the time. And, I was good at them. I don't know how. It just kind of happened. I think it's like bullshit tricks. I'm never like impressed with roasts, it's just you do like a math equation, you go like, okay, what do they look like? And then you start like instead of going like, oh, he's fat, you go like wide. Well, what is wide? And then you go like, oh, this thing in life is wide. And then you find a way to connect it to that, like.
That's interesting.
I feel like I can hear it in your jokes some weeks where the guys will joke about telling their Scott joke of the week.
Yeah.
I love hearing everybody's Scott joke because it's like when that punchline hits, that's my favorite part. Like, where is this going?
Yeah.
Am I lost in the maze? Boom. I'm laughing.
And also, I'm like, I don't think I've ever written even a day before the show. I'm always writing just that day before, like during work. And then sometimes they'll be talking and because at first we compliment the wrestler, and I'll be like slowly typing up my stuff in order because I didn't create an order because I was just writing them as I was driving all day. So that could be like super nerve wracking. So
when does your best inspiration hit you for joke writing? Is there a certain time, or is it just kind of just when it pops in your mind?
Just early in the morning. Just again, I think it's really because there's less distraction unless New Japan's on.
Yeah.
So, and since there's no distraction, you start talking to yourself. That's all I do. I pretend I'm on a roll, and then I see what happens. Like I don't go like, oh, what is I don't go, oh, what would I write? I go, you're performing this on stage and it's already going well. And with that, you give yourself like a confidence boost, and then you just shit talk the person like out loud, and then like jokes just start happening, you know?
How long were you doing stand-up before you started doing roast battles? Were you already pretty seasoned, or?
I mean, it's was I seasoned? I guess I started doing battles when I was like 22, and I started when I was 17.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
You
I was
had
doing
time,
it
though.
enough. Yeah. But it's its own thing entirely anyway. Like there's people who are amazing at battles who can't do stand up, and vice versa for sure. Like, yeah, very different things.
Now, who were some of your favorite comics coming up, and did they influence your style, or was it just more something you liked listening to?
So, like, getting into stand up and starting, it was when I started, I loved Louis C.K. And I wanted to be Louis C.K. and I definitely sounded like Louis C.K. And I loved Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle, you know, the big guys, and Burr and Patrice, like all the tough crowd guys. I'm from Jersey, and it's like that's very much a part of it. Is that type of comedy, and so I loved all those guys. But even before that, it was like I loved Jim Carrey as a kid, which got me into In Living Color, which got me into stand up. And like I wanted to be a stand up since I was 7, I think.
Wow.
And then
so
before
were you always writing jokes?
I remember I found like a science notebook from middle school, and there was jokes written in the corners. So yeah, I mean, at least in middle school, I was writing stuff. I mean, was it good? No, not necessarily, but you know, it was like ideas and the idea of being funny. At least I was attempting it, I guess. Yeah.
It's just getting those reps in. Once you
Yeah.
practice writing a joke, you get all your bad jokes out of the way before anybody hears you. And then from that point on, it's just your style. And do people find you funny or not?
Yeah. And then when you are into it that early and you start, you know, you read up on the history of it, and you know who started when, you realize there's a lot of guys who started young. Like, you know, this guy started when he was 18. And so I'm like 16, like, oh no, I'm wasting my time. Like, you know, there was already this urgency because I had read stories about, oh, Woody Allen was submitting jokes to, you know, your show of shows when he was however many years old or whatever, you know?
I think.
Yep. And then on the flip side, you find out guys like Rodney Dangerfield started.
Yeah, later, much later. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And life happens too, you know. It's like I started at 17, but there was years of me barely being able to do it, and this and that, and you know, yeah.
I was gonna say, I think I heard something. I was curious if you think this too. I think it was maybe Michael Jordan or somebody said that I wasn't better. I was just more obsessed with this and what I do to anybody. Do you feel like that was you too? Like you just, you know, part of the success is being obsessed with this. And
I mean, I think detriment is I'm no longer as obsessed because I did start so young, and so you get like jaded, and you know you're 20 and jaded. What the fuck is that? Like that's, you know, it's insane. So, and also you see the thing with basketball and Michael Jordan saying that is being obsessed with being, you know, because the objective is literally in a sport is to be great at the sport. But in comedy, if I go, well, I'm obsessed with comedy, it's like, well, that could be irrelevant, you know. It's also like the idea of being like a nag, you know, like forcing your way into like there's, you know, like buddying up to, you know, like you don't get into the NBA because you know you're a good friend of some other, like you got to be able to play fucking basketball, you know, and comedy necessarily isn't like that. So yeah, you can be obsessed with it, but you also have to be like obsessed with it in a healthy way, because you can be obsessed and it still doesn't fucking work out, you know? And so you got to like have your priorities straight and not be a psycho. And also a big part of comedy is like, you got to be relatable. You got to be a human being. It's like, there's so many comics who like, they'll call people civilians like they're in the fucking military or something, you know? And like this, I hear so many comics say this, where it's like, oh, all my friends are comics, and so it's so hard to laugh at other people. And it's like, everybody else is way funnier than comics. Comics are fucking losers for the most part, But then you realize that, like, oh, these comedians, like, they're not funny, they're just joke writers. That's a lot of it too, where it's like, I like back of the bus funny people. And if you could write a joke, awesome, but that doesn't necessarily, like, it doesn't, again, like, there's a lot of Harvard graduates that are in writers' rooms because they figured out a way to write. There is a way. You could figure it out. I mean, there's comics I love, and then I found out, like, they literally learned from joke books. Like, it's possible. Like, you can learn from a joke book. Anybody listening? You really can. It's demented.
Now, would you say that as a comic, you got to really learn to promote yourself and get out there well?
Yeah, another thing I'm terrible at.
I was just about to ask. I
don't do it at all. I don't think I've ever promoted the Wrestle Roast podcast. Like, I've never tweeted about it, or I don't think so.
I mean, that settles my next question. I was going to say, is there
on my own account,
learn from comedy to help promote the podcast? But
well, so you're just talking to the wrong guy about promotion. But I would say, like, you do have to constantly post things. You do have to, somehow we've all woken up, and, like, Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, they are a part of our reality. It's no longer fake somehow. And so you have to present yourself, like 4 times a day, or are you doing this?
That's the hardest thing. We talk to other podcasters, and I think the scariest thing is that everybody is learning as we go. You ask other podcasters for advice, and they're like, look, man, nobody told me shit. They're just like, this is what I've been doing, and it's kind of working. And you're like, oh, okay, so we're just all rolling the dice and hoping for the best.
And I think with comedy, especially if you love the idea of being funny and funny, it's that, like, tweeting and doing it's like, it so goes against whatever that, like, feeling is, like that feeling of being genuine. Because it is also a tool that is like, hey, come get this thing, It's almost like disrespectful to the craft, to just, like, throw out your dog shit observations because you have to,
Right.
and so there is that battle, and yeah, that's every day. I just stare at the wall going, are you gonna post,
Yeah, and what post is going to connect with people? You'll put out a post that 5 people like, and then you'll put out some bullshit post that you could care less about, and you're like, how'd that get 200 likes?
Oh, yeah, dude, you say the dumbest thing. Oh, that's the biggest heartbreaker is, like, so if you're doing well on stage, that's awesome. But if you're doing poorly, and it's not because you're sucking, but it's like, because and you can this is how you can tell. This is what I mean, because people go, oh, don't blame the crowd. But sometimes you can, and this is why, like, just like you said, where you could write, like, the dumbest tweet and it'll get more likes than a well-crafted tweet or something. If I'm doing poorly, I will go, oh, what are my 3 lamest jokes? And I'll tell them, and they'll do well. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm bombing, I go, oh, I know how to recover. Tell your worst stuff. And then people love it. And you go, well, go fuck yourself. What am I doing here? Who am I?
That does feel good, though. Like, digging yourself out of a hole, but it's like digging yourself out of a hole with the worst shovel you own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Now, did you ever see that new Twilight Zone remake where they had the episode with Kumail Nanjiani as a comic? And it's like, when he's doing the material that he likes on stage, that he thinks is important, it's going nowhere. But then when he starts telling things from his life, it's going over huge. And then it's almost like it starts consuming him, that he starts telling more of these things from his life. And it's an episode you'd have to see, because, like, I think it's one of the better written episodes I've ever seen of theirs. And just, I wanted to get a comic's point of view from it.
So I mean, wait. So what's the idea of the episode? Is that so he's bombing because he's trying to say important things, but it turns out when he speaks about his life, it's way more relatable. That
Yeah,
for
and he's
sure
also
happens.
realizing it's hurting the people at home. So it's this fine line.
Well, okay, yeah. So I mean, and we'll go back to like roasts and wrestle roasts, So I was on the Comedy Central roast battles. I think I was on 2 of them, right? And one of them, the battler made a joke about my sister that I said, "Hey, don't bring this up." Like, we never do that, you never go, "Hey," like it's always fair game. But now we're talking television, And so the comic told me, "Hey, maybe don't say this, don't say that." I go, "Dude, of course," And then I said, "Hey, don't bring this up about this person." I think I already said it was my sister, but anyway, she called me fucking crying after it aired and stuff, and that was like really brutal. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, I don't do roast battles anymore, and part of it is like, I got a girlfriend, she has a kid, like I don't want to stand there and hear some fucking random guy make the joke and then they're gonna post it on YouTube where no one's gonna even watch it except someone who might know someone who is being talked about, which is insane, So yeah, you definitely got to be smarter. But in terms of myself and my experiences, like fair game. I'll talk about anything,
Yeah, that was actually something we brought up with Mike Lawrence about just doing roast, and he said with the autism diagnosis that he just almost doesn't have like the emotion to process it.
Yeah,
and that's why he thinks he's the best at it. And I told Dave I couldn't remember 100%, and I was hesitant to bring it up to Mike, but I'm not sure if he was the one that roasted Ralphie May like fresh off his divorce.
Yeah, he did, man. He was the one who nuked Ralphie, and I believe that really affected Ralphie. I think he was pissed.
Yeah, and it was intense, but like when you're watching a roast, you're like, holy shit, that joke hit.
Yeah,
but then you almost forget about the person behind it.
Sure. Yeah. At the same time, Ralphie went in there like he shouldn't have done that show. He just showed up and he's like, you smell bad. Now it's all coming back to me. Like I remember Ralphie not giving a shit there at all. And then just being like, so Ralphie was bombing before Mike even said anything terrible because Ralphie's jokes literally weren't hitting, And then Mike comes out with like not only funny jokes, which Ralphie wasn't doing, but cutting jokes. So it's like, you're not only cutting a guy who's not doing well, you're cutting a guy who's bombing. So I think that was part of it, was that Ralphie was bombing too. Because when you're both doing well in a roast, dude, you could say anything. It really it's gonna bounce off both of you because everybody in the room, there's this feeling of like, this doesn't mean anything personal. But if someone's not doing well, all of a sudden you start feeling for the person and it comes off like bullying,
Kind of, yeah.
It's almost like a boxing match where there's some back and forth, but then when a guy is losing the match, it's like, oh, you're just beating that poor man and now he's gonna have brain damage.
Yeah, it's like, well, we came to box. I don't know.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of those things where you could be talking shit with your buddies and everything like that, but then some random people show up and you have those guys that are going, ooh, oh, and then suddenly the guy's embarrassed now that he's getting shit talked and people are reacting.
This doesn't happen to me as much because, again, I don't write as much online, but my friends who constantly post, there are people who, if my friend is a type of comic that is is shit talky or whatever, however you want to call it, then there's these people in their comments shitting on them because they think it's part of it, but it just comes off kind of mean. And yeah, I got friends who that bothers them. Yeah. It's like, I'm mean amongst my friends with my friends, and then our fans see that, so they decide to be mean to me. That's not a way to.
Dude, we don't know you.
Yeah, very weird.
It is weird how that works, right? To fandom and social media. Oh, I'm just gonna say some messed up shit to this person I've never met because that's cool.
Well, dude, I don't think I've ever read a response to a post that's ever been worth it. No post is worth, unless it ended in a question mark. What are you doing? Now,
who has the wildest responses between wrestling and comedy? Like which do you think has the rougher fans in the social media comment?
So wrestling, I think it's more, whereas comedians, you're going to get a specific amount of people commenting at you, and you kind of know based on the material you're doing, the shows you're doing, the whatever, even like sometimes the podcast you're doing, where it's like these people are listening to me because they're into those things, and so you're expecting it, as opposed to like, let's say you work for WWE. Oh my goodness, I would assume 500 people like write the most random wrestler in WWE and just threaten, tell them they should kill themselves every day just cause,
Right.
And then like, you go like wrestling in particular, because it is like there's a childish thing to it, and it's like we know that like there are people, and I don't want to be offensive, but like mentally they aren't all there sometimes.
Right.
And so they're just commenting like Mike said, in terms of he might not have the filter. I'm telling you, if anybody doesn't, like, percentage wise, I'm sure there's more people without filters that are fans of wrestling than anything else. And so they're just being so harsh, so rude, so wrong, and they probably don't even realize it. They got something wrong with them.
100%. Now, Scott, thank you for joining us today. We are honored to have you on. Like I said, patreon.com/WrestleRoast. If you're not listening to Wrestle Roast, you're not doing life right. Scott, is there anything else you'd like to promote before we let you go?
No, just stay safe, be well.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.